Hi, this is Guyus Seralius, and in this video I wanted to briefly discuss how I became a pantheist, or more specifically, how I went from being a theist to agnostic to an atheist, and then finally to a pantheist. You might find it interesting that I became a pantheist many years before I even knew the word pantheist existed. I didn't even know there were others who shared the view that the entire universe is God. Several years ago, back when YouTube was first created, my older brother was discussing some of my philosophical views with a YouTuber he had just met online. The YouTuber expressed in a video response that it all sounded like pantheism. Shortly thereafter, my brother told me about it and asked me whether or not I considered myself to be a pantheist. At that time, I had no idea whether I was or not. The term pantheist was completely new to me. It almost sounded like a bad word or like some satanic label. So I looked it up in the dictionary and said to myself, well, yes, I guess I am a pantheist. I also searched the term online and of course came across Baruch Spinoza, who greatly helped to spread pantheism and who has now become one of my favorite classic philosophers. Like most of us, I started out believing what my parents believed and viewing the world as they viewed it. Both of my parents were raised as Christians and actually first met one another during church services. However, it wasn't as though they were completely obsessed with the religion, as some are. For the most part, they attended church simply because it was more of the norm back then, and more expected of their generation. The church gave them a sense of community, and provided them with a social network. This of course predates all the online social networks now so available on the internet. Sociologists have claimed for years, based on studies, that social networking is one of the main reasons most people do attend church or why they join a religion. It allows them to feel a sense of belonging. Fortunately, my mother and father never pushed their religious beliefs onto me or forced me to go to church. In fact, as a family, we attended church services off and on for only a brief time during my childhood. I remember my father would play tic-tac-toe and hangman with me and my brothers and sister during services to help pass the time. So it wasn't long before we stopped going to church altogether. I think my parents just finally became too busy and stressed trying to earn enough money in a failing economy during the Reagan years. But thankfully, they allowed me the freedom to explore on my own, in all directions, the entire subject of God and existence, which I am eternally grateful for. I wish more parents would allow their children the same freedom. An early memory I have of questioning the Christian religion was during Sunday school class. I was about 6 or 7, and my Sunday school teacher just got through discussing how Jesus had walked on water. I politely asked her, how do we know he really walked on water? She immediately gasped in disbelief. I instantly thought I was in trouble, so I quickly came back with, never mind. I never again felt comfortable enough to ask such questions inside the church. I uncomfortably discovered that day that church was the last place to debate theology. People go to church to worship their religion, not to debate it. The day I probably first started to really question the actual existence of God was when I was about 8 years old. I remember it quite vividly. My father and I were driving in the car. I was crouched down onto the floorboard of the passenger side, and I asked him, "Who created God?" He paused a short while and then replied jokingly, "Another God?" Of course I came back with, "Then who created that God?" And again he replied, "Another God." This went on a few more times before I caught on to the endless cycle and then became clever enough to ask in slight frustration, "Well, who created the very first God?" To my surprise, this gave my father some pause. He didn't seem to have an answer. But he finally spoke those 3 infamous words, "I don't know." I have to commend him for his ability to admit this, which is never easy. If only more people could do the same, the world would probably be in less need of repair. I continued to think about the Christian religion more and more, but most of it just seemed very illogical to me. So around the age of 9 or 10, I became very unsatisfied with the answers provided by the Christian religion. I also became very uncertain as to whether there was a God or not, and therefore I naturally became agnostic. For the time being, I stopped believing in the traditional Christian God and started seeking some other explanation to our existence. I would think about it off and on as I grew up. I even once had a long discussion with a junior high school friend who truly believed and defended the idea that heaven was a place of clouds laden with golden objects. But it all just sounded too silly to me, like something out of a fairy tale. The possibility that the Christian God existed entered my head only 2 more times, and that was when I was in high school. When I was in the 10th grade, a friend of mine invited me to go on a church retreat, which was basically camping out in cabins with a group of young Christians. I reluctantly agreed. While there, I had the opportunity to ask a priest why he believed in the Christian God. He explained how the complexity of the I impressed him so much that he believed there must be a God, as described in the Christian Bible. But when it came to the complexity of the I felt just the opposite. I thought it was far too complex and incredible for some God to have designed and created. Of course, I didn't tell the priest this. About a year later, I was in my bedroom trying to draw a picture of what I thought God might look like if he actually did exist. For the most part, it turned out to look like the traditional personified image of an old man with a white beard. I had also tried to establish the right expression for him, but I never could seem to settle on just one. I did not think of him as merely happy or sad, nor angry or disappointed, so I ended up trying to fit in all human emotions, carefully intertwined. I think it turned out okay, in terms of a traditional depiction of God, but it quickly became apparent to me that if there was a God, he, or it, would be much more than any personified version. And I didn't just want to know what God looked like, I wanted to know what God was. I decided once and for all to try and figure out whether or not there was a God. I also remember thinking to myself, if God does not exist, then how do I exist? And what's it all about? I became determined to find the answers to all these questions. But it wasn't until I graduated from high school that I had enough time to give it my full, undivided attention. A good friend of mine would often drop by the house in the evening, and we would drive around for hours philosophizing about anything and everything. We once stayed up all night lying in lawn chairs in his backyard, discussing all sorts of philosophical topics like the nature of the universe, time, existence, and how a nation should be governed, until we literally saw the sun come up. There finally came a time, during one of our nighttime drives, when he asked me point blank, "So what does it all amount to?" I paused a moment, and then answered almost instinctively, "Balance." Our philosophical nighttime drives unfortunately became more and more infrequent, though, because my family and I had moved further away from the city to a quiet small town. It was a big change for me because I was accustomed to being very social. I now found myself basically out in the middle of nowhere with nothing but time on my hands to contemplate the great mysteries of the universe. I now look back on that free time when I had few distractions and few responsibilities as priceless to my development. It was my time in the wilderness, so to speak, which everyone should have, a time and place when one can just sit still and think about it all. During this time, I also took some college courses. I was an average student and started out a little slow. I was so burned out on school and wasn't yet ready to take my college education seriously. But in time I grew to love it, and I eventually became a very good student. About a year later, my brothers and I moved out of my parents' house and into a house of our own. There I continued to ponder the deep mysteries of life, and for the first time I started to consistently write down my ideas and conclusions. My younger brother would visit often, and soon became my new philosophical partner. Even back then he was quite brilliant and had a great philosophical mind of his own. In time our discussions matured. He really helped to keep me on course because he is more of a left-side thinker who thinks in more logical, mathematical terms, whereas I am more of a right-side thinker, an artist by nature. He has always helped me with the fine details, and I have always helped him not to get lost in the details. So together we make a good pair. As a matter of fact, all my brothers and sister are sharp-minded and have always helped to keep me on my toes. It was around 1993 when I had one of my greatest epiphanies, and that was that the whole universe is, in one way or another, connected into a single whole, and that any one of us can view him or herself to be that whole. Any one of us can say, "I am the universe," or "I am the all." Philosophers and spiritualists have been saying something along these lines for centuries. Hippies were definitely known for saying such things during the late 60s and early 70s, but most of us never gave it much attention or took it too seriously. It was usually just something a hippie often said to sound philosophically deep or spiritual. The truth is, though, I don't think most hippies even truly knew just how accurate they were. In most cases, they were just parroting what they had heard some other hippie or spiritual guru saying. But the big surprise to me was when I discovered, for myself, that the expression, "I am the universe," was not just some poetic metaphor, but that it was actually the case. I now deeply believe that I am literally, in every sense of the word, the universe, and so is everyone else, because it requires the whole universe in order to exist, and it's all connected. I recently toyed with the idea of coming up with a new term that could express this view of being one with the universe. I first thought of using the word panmeism to mean all is one, but that was a little difficult to say, so I then came up with panmeism to express all is me. And one who believes in panmeism would be a panmeist. During this time of my life, I had many other powerful insights. For example, I wanted to know what was responsible for my existence and/or the existence of the universe. I instinctively felt that the universe couldn't have just all been some random accident or some one-time event that sprang from some singularity point, whatever that is, and which will simply end one day in a cold shiver or big crunch, never to re-emerge. That just sounded too cheap and problematic. To me, the universe seemed more profound than that. It's all about something. So after countless hours of deep reflection, I came to the conclusion that the universe could not have been created, but had to have always existed and always will exist. It was now impossible for me to ever go back to believing in any traditional God of creation.